The following podcast is an exclusive presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Thank you for coming to the Project Entertainment Network store. Please place your order. A good choice. A t-shirt for the horror show with Brian Keene. Amanda Method coffee mug. There's more. A Necrocastic on hoodie. That's sharp. But why on earth would you want Bizong leggings? Wait, are you Mr. Frank? The Project Entertainment Network store, stacked with goodies from all your favorite podcasts. T-shirts, hoodies, mugs and more. www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
There shall come a podcast like no other. Defenders Dialogue with Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Marvel Comics' original superhero non-team convenes once again. The Incredible Hulk, the Savage Submariner, the Master of the Mystic Arts, Doctor Strange, and a dynamic supporting cast of Marvel superheroes battle against evil as the Defenders. Without further ado, true believers, here's your hosts, Brian Keene and Christopher Golden. Excelsior!
And welcome back once again, true believers, to Defenders Dialogue. I'm Brian Keene, talking very loudly at the beginning so that Tommy Clark can crank that music. Let's pause and listen to it. All right, there we go. Tommy, that's your cue to end the music now. Tommy, end the music now. All right. If you're wondering where Chris is not here with us this week. I am flying solo, so on his behalf, I would just like to give you a hearty Excelsior, true believers. We are going to interrupt our coverage of J.M. DeMatteis's run on the Defenders to go back in history and talk about Demon Hunter. And I'll tell you what that is here in a moment. But before we do that, this week's show is brought to you by Lucas Milliron and his new novel, Tim E. Less. Tim isn't perfect, not by any stretch. He's not the perfect husband or father, just a guy struggling to provide for his family and keep it all together. When it doesn't look like things can get any worse, the accident happens. He only knows this, that the doctors are lying, hiding behind false faces. If only he could remember. Follow Tim on his downward spiral through the asylum and to hell and back as he uncovers the truth of what happened to his family. Timmy Less is a disturbed horror thriller of insanity, chemical seduction, and true nightmares come to life. Remembering is the real horror. It is Silent Hill meets The Cell. That is Tim E. Less by Lucas Milliron. That's Milliron, and it is available right now on Kindle and in paperback, and now as an audiobook on Audible. So we thank Tim for sponsoring this week's show. As I said, Chris is not here. Now, if you're a regular listener to Defenders Dialogue, you may remember the episode I did about Devil Slayer and his origins, etc. And we talked about how that character was actually based on a character created for another comic book company. That comic book company was Atlas Comics. They were a very short-lived comic book company. They tried to rival Marvel and DC in the late 70s. Unfortunately, they could not get distribution like Marvel and DC, and it killed them. They basically published, I believe, 2 months worth of comics and then went out of business. One of those comics was, in fact, Demon Hunter. It lasted one issue. I have that issue right here. It was published in 1975, and we open not with Eric Simon Payne, but with a character named Gideon Cross. Now, much like Eric Simon Payne, Gideon Cross is a telepath. And much like Eric Simon Payne, Gideon Cross is a harvester of eyes for a mysterious cult. And he's an ex-Vietnam veteran, and he has a shadow cloak. So this is, in fact, Devil Slayer, but he's called Demon Hunter. The only difference is his costume is red, and his shadow cloak is blue. Everything else is pretty much the same. He is one man fighting alone against all the demons in hell and on earth. The character, created by Richard F. Buckler and David Anthony Kraft, In this case here in the credits box, Buckler gets credit for concept, plot, and art. David Anthony Kraft gets credit for the script. And right there on the splash page, they even dedicate it to Buck Dharma and the rest of the band from Blue Oyster Cult. So if you've been listening to Defenders dialogue, everything here is the same. This is Devil Slayer. Okay, basically, this comic comes out, one issue, ends on a cliffhanger, Atlas goes under, Kraft and Buckler say, fuck it, let's bring him over to Marvel. So they kidnap him and bring him to the Marvel Universe. They kind of do the opposite of what Steve Gerber does later with Howard the Duck. When Steve Gerber has a falling out with Marvel, the last comic Steve Gerber does for Marvel, he has Howard the Duck go to a different universe, and they put a copy of Howard the Duck into the Marvel Universe. Okay, so any appearance of Howard in Marvel since then is not the original Howard the Duck. It's a copy, because Steve Gerber abducts him from the Marvel Universe. It doesn't get more meta than that, folks, okay? And I'm sure at some point, Chris and I will be talking about the Howard the Duck run, because Howard is a Defender, and eventually we're going to run out of Defenders comic books to talk about, and then we're going to talk about all the other books that tie into the Defenders, as we're doing today. So yes, anyway, we open with Gideon Cross, a.k.a. Demon Hunter, confronting a hitman who is about to pull a hit. He's aiming at this mob boss named Severs. Severs is having some kind of party. He's entertaining people, and this hitman is up above on this cliff, and Demon Hunter comes out and confronts him and talks like he knows this hitman, and he even says, "What's wrong? Don't you recognize me, Matthews? We used to work together, remember?" And this hitman, Matthews, Gary Matthews is his name. He's like, "I don't know you." And Demon Hunter tells him, "We were infantrymen in the same unit." And then he recognizes him. "Gideon Cross?" "That's right, the man who once saved your life. Unfortunately for you, I'm now here to take your life." He gives the hitman a choice. He can die at Gideon Cross's hand, or he can jump off this cliff that he's positioned himself on. We don't know which happens, but we see the hitman fall off the cliff, and down below at this mafia boss, Severs is his name, at his home, we see him tell everybody, "Oh, don't worry about it. It's just a problem that's been solved." And then Gideon Cross shows up in his Demon Hunter attire. One of the mob goons notices him, and he does a trick that, of course, we've seen Devil Slayer do in multiple issues of the Defenders. He telepathically changes it so that they don't see his outfit. And then he goes to the Severs, and we find out the hitman did indeed choose to jump off the cliff. And Severs pays Demon Hunter the money for protecting him. Now, here is where we diverge from Devil Slayer. Not only does Demon Hunter get cash, he also gets some of Severs' blood. We see a flask. He hands Severs a flask, and Severs cuts his thumb, pours his blood into this flask. And we're not sure what this is about yet. We're not supposed to know. Severs tells Demon Hunter he has 2 more jobs for him this evening. The first job is he wants him to be a bodyguard while he goes to make a drug transaction. And then after that, he wants him to fly to Jamaica and kill his mob boss partner. So Gideon Cross retires to his room with the flask of Severs' blood. And we find that he's conflicted, much like Marvel's Devil Slayer. He's not sure if he should trust this cult. He's conflicted about working for Severs. He doesn't understand why the cult needs Severs' blood. And then we get a flashback. And the flashback I'm not going to dwell on because it's exactly the same as Devil Slayer's origin. It's just a different character, different universe, different comic book company universe. The only difference here is that this cult, in the Defenders, of course, it's the cult of Vera Gemini, another Blue Oyster Cult reference. Here in Demon Hunter, the cult were called the Harvesters of Night. But the only real difference is that the cult want Gideon to use this blood flask every time. Anybody that he goes out and works for, he needs to charge them their blood, and they must pour their blood into this flask, which is why he's had Severs do this. So anyway, him and Severs go off, and Severs gets several $1 million in cash. Gideon Cross bodyguards him, and then later, Demon Hunter is at Kennedy International Airport. He's on his way to Jamaica to do this other hit for Severs. He's gonna kill this rival mob boss. When suddenly he sees a newspaper, and the headline is that Severs has committed suicide. No, what? Gideon Cross just saw the man get $1 million. Why would he commit suicide? He has everything going for him. He wants answers. Before he can get those answers, he needs to meet up with his contact from the cult and deliver the blood flask. But when he meets up with the contact, instead, it's a demon. The demon confronts him. The demon steals the flask. Demon Hunter makes short work of the demon. And he finds out that the cult has now marked him for death because they sensed his misgivings. They sensed that he was questioning their motives. The demon is destroyed. It takes the blood flask with us. It disappears. And Gideon realizes, much like Devil Slayer did in The Defenders, that the cult is deceiving him. So instead of flying to Jamaica, he decides to go confront the cult. We then get another flashback. It's a ring of stones, very similar to Stonehenge. And it's surrounded by a mystic barrier of invisibility. He makes it there, and we flash back to the first time he was there. He fought a demon there. He defeated it. That was how he became the Demon Hunter. He went to work for the cult, etc. Again, if it sounds like I'm glossing over, it's because you've heard this origin story. It's Devil Slayer's origin story. Again, the only thing that's different, they give him this flask. He still is not quite sure, though, why they're collecting the blood of the people he works for. But he enters the stone circle and teleports into the lair of the cult. And there he finds some kind of weird sacrificial spell going on. There's an altar, and we find out that they have Severs' blood in the flask, and they say, "The demon comes. He obeys the summons. To protect the soul of our sacrifice, that the demon may cohabit its body, we release instead the life essence of Damien Severs, whom we also slew." So what they've done, okay, they're using Severs' mortal shell as a body for the demon to inhabit, okay? And they're offering up Severs' blood in its place. And this demon is, in fact, Astaroth, Grand Duke of Hell. And as Demon Hunter watches, Astaroth possesses the body, rises up, and he says, "You have done well, mortals. Together we shall achieve xenogenesis." Now, Defenders Dialogue listeners, you have heard that term before. Xenogenesis, Richard Buckler, David Anthony Kraft, was hey, look, because Chris isn't here this week, I did not mute my cell phone because, every week he doesn't mute his cell phone, and it dings at least once. It's like you're here in spirit, Chris. But anyway, Xenogenesis, yes. You remember that multi-part saga we covered here on Defenders Dialogue. Again, that was a carryover from this Demon Hunter. Xenogenesis, the rebirth of the demon race, the demon says. We've heard those exact quotes. Gideon Cross flees, and it ends on a cliffhanger. It says next issue, the beginning of Xenogenesis, except that never happened. As we said, Atlas, unfortunately, went out of business very quickly, and Richard Buckler and David Anthony Kraft took this entire concept, this entire character, changed his name so they couldn't get sued, snuck him into the Marvel Universe, and the rest, as they say, is history. Next week, Chris will be back, and we will continue with J.M. DeMatteis's classic seminal run on the Defenders. But with this special episode, we have now covered the entire backstory of Devil Slayer. So you don't have to hear me bang on about him anymore. other than, his appearances in the book, which are forthcoming. One more time, I want to thank this week's sponsor. That is Tim E. Less by Lucas Milliron. That's Milliron. That book is available right now on Kindle, paperback, and in audiobook from Audible. Tim isn't perfect, not by any stretch. He's not the perfect husband or father. He's just a guy struggling to provide for his family and keep it all together. When it doesn't look like things can get any worse, Tim has an accident. He only knows now that the doctors are lying to him. They are hiding behind false faces. If only he could remember what actually happened to him. You, dear reader, can follow Tim on his downward spiral through the asylum to hell and back as he uncovers the truth of what happened to his family. Tim E. Less is a disturbed horror thriller of insanity, chemical seduction, and true nightmares come to life because remembering is the real horror. It's Silent Hill meets The Cell. That is Tim E. Less by Lucas Milliron. Available once again on Kindle and in paperback on Amazon and an audiobook on Audible. We thank him for sponsoring this week's show. I want to remind you, if you enjoy this show, you might enjoy Three Guys with Beards. That's a show that Chris does every week with co-hosts Jonathan Mayberry and Jim Moore. And you might enjoy The Horror Show with Brian Keene. That's a show I do every week with Dave Thomas and Mary Sangiovanni. You might also enjoy Necrocasticon. That's a show that our engineer Tommy Clark, the guy who always plays the music so loud at the beginning, does every week. Necrocasticon has a lot of loud music, so if you enjoy that part of the show, you'll definitely enjoy Necrocasticon. And of course, all three of those podcasts are available wherever you're listening to this one: iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Google Play Music, etc. They're made available by our dear friends at the Project Entertainment Network. And you can support the Project Entertainment Network on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/projectentnet. Or just, just Google Project Entertainment Network and Patreon, and you will find them. So until next week, true believers, Excelsior.
Do you love comic books and consider yourself a die-hard fan? Then you need to listen to Parlapod. We have news, reviews, and interviews with your favorite pros, all while bringing some serious laughs. New episodes drop every Wednesday in time for New Comic Book Day. Parlapod is available on the Project Entertainment Network, all major podcast outlets, and parlapod.com. Tune in and fuel your fandom with Parlapod.
My Favorite Story, a podcast author anthology featuring short fiction from the hosts of the Project Entertainment Network shows Three Guys with Beards, Jim Moore, Jonathan Mayberry, and Chris Golden,
Tom Clark from Necrocast Igborn,
Brian Keene of The Horror Show, Chuck Buda, and Armand Rosamilia of The Mando Method,
Mary Sangiovanni of Cosmic Shenanigans,
Jay Wilburn from Matters of Faith,
John Urban-Sick of Ink Stains,
Biz Zung's Mr. Frank.
Available on Kindle and in paperback and through the Project Entertainment Network store.
www.projectentertainmentnetwork.com.
This has been an exclusive presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.